Hi everyone, August Biniaz here with CPI Capital. I'm joined by 𝗖𝗣𝗶 Benesocky. Welcome, Eva.
Thank you, August.
We host the CPI Academy YouTube show dedicated to adding value to our viewers' investment journey. We bring on experts and discuss all topics related to real estate investing. Please subscribe and like the video. We hope you enjoy it.
We hope you enjoy, and thank you, August, and hello, everybody. Today we are joined by the one and only Mike Wolf. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you for having me. Good to be here.
Yes, we're so happy.
Awesome. Welcome, Mike.
Mike, why don't we just kind of start off by you? We wanted to kind of talk about your journey and your start with what you do now. Maybe we can start there, and you can let our viewers know.
Sure. Well, boy, I've been doing this for a long time, probably before you were born. So I've been investing for around 31 years now. January 1st will be my 32-year anniversary of doing this industry. But I totally got into it 100% by mistake. And I love to tell the story because so many people, for whatever reason, they think because I've been doing this so long that I was just like born to do this. And I came out of the womb knowing how to be a real estate investor. And it was just always so easy for me. And nothing could be further from the truth. So if we go way back to when I was in the middle of grade 12, I had no idea what I wanted to be when I grew up. And I certainly didn't know what I wanted to do the following year. Now, my parents, especially my mother, she was always driving into my head, Mike, doctor, lawyer, doctor, lawyer.
Oh, yeah.
And I am terrified of blood. So doctor was like not in the cards. But I always saw these shows on TV, and the lawyers always had these fancy offices, and it looked kind of exciting. So I thought, okay, I think I could be a lawyer. So I went to University of Calgary, got my first degree. And by the time I got that degree, I had racked up a whole bunch of student loans and decided, you know what, before I go back and get my next degree, I need to pay these off. I don't want to be that far in debt. And so a buddy of mine, his mother was a manager at the phone company, which once again, I'm going to date myself. Back then it was AGT, Alberta Government Telephones. Now it's known as TELUS. And I got a job there and decided I was going to pay off these student loans. Now, while I was there, I built up my credit and was making pretty good money because it was union and it was a government job and paid well. And I actually bought my first property to live in while I was working at the phone company. I was in my mid-20s back then, actually early 20s.
This is in Alberta.
This is in Alberta. This is in Calgary. Yeah, that's where I got my start. So I know you have a lot of Canadians following you. So yeah, this is all in Calgary. And basically, I bought my principal residence. And not long after I bought that, my mortgage broker calls me up and says, hey, Mike, if you want, I can get you another mortgage if you want to buy another property. And I go, another property? Why would I want another property? That seemed like the most foreign concept to me ever at that time. Now I wish I could get that phone call like every day. But anyway, so I go, why would I want another property? He goes, well, you put tenants in there, they pay down your mortgage for you. You hold on to it, and 25 years from now, that's your retirement. And I go, okay, that kind of makes sense. So back then, the only due diligence I knew how to do was I wanted to buy a home that looked pretty. And I wanted to buy one that was close to where I lived, so I didn't have to drive very far to collect my rent. By the way, don't ever use that due diligence to pick your next investment property. But that's what I did. And, I kept my job at the phone company, collected the rent. And around 2 years later, Calgary boomed. Calgary, as you know, is an oil city. And whenever oil goes up, especially back in those days, now it's a lot more diversified. But back in those days, if oil went up, real estate went up. If oil went in a slump, so did the real estate. And so a couple of years after I bought this property, the market took off. And all of a sudden, I was sitting on this equity. And I remember thinking to myself, over the last 2 years, I made this much at the phone company doing so. I didn't mind it, but I certainly didn't love it and look forward to doing it. I made this much in real estate, and I didn't even know what I was doing in real estate. So at that point, I did probably what any mid-20s guy would do. And my ego got really inflated, and I thought I knew everything there was to know about real estate. So I promptly quit my job at the phone company, not really thinking that, hey, now I can't get mortgages anymore. And more importantly, I told my parents that, hey, I'm not going to law school. I'm not going back to school. I am like a real estate investor. This is my passion. This is what I do from now on. And being a lawyer, that was your dream for me. That's not my dream. And so I had to break it to my mother, who's still pissed at me to this day, that I was not going to go back to school. And I remember her telling me, you should get your second degree so you have something to fall back on. And you can always pursue real estate after, but get that second degree. And no, I knew everything there was to know at this point because I had one successful transaction under my belt. And so anyway, here I am. And not long after I quit my job, I realized that, okay, well, you know, maybe I was really successful on that first deal, but what do I do now? I can't really necessarily repeat that. And I didn't really have a strategy. And so, well, actually, even before I got to that point, I actually ended up purchasing another property. You have to remember, my first property was meant to be a long-term hold. Now I decided, well, I don't have a job anymore, so I need to do like flips. I need to get paychecks every, 3 months, 6 months. And so bought my next property, didn't really know the due diligence steps, didn't really know what I should be doing, and managed to lose a lot of the money I made on that first deal. And that was probably the best thing that ever happened to me. Didn't feel like that at the time, but it was the best thing that ever happened to me. It made me a lot more humble. It also made me, instead of being a know-it-all, it turned me into a learn-it-all, where I started to seek out other information, and I got my first mentor, and I basically invested the little money that I had left in education so that I could actually learn how to do this properly. And I wish I could say the rest was history, everything went smooth after that, but I certainly made a lot less mistakes. And so now you fast forward, and these days, right now I'm living in Mexico. I abandoned Canada in October because I'm not really good at being locked down. So I'm hanging out in Mexico all winter, but most of my money comes now passively. Back then it was very transactional: buy a property and turn into a flip or whatever, and then find your next deal. I did one at a time, very traditionally. And then over time, I learned how to do things more efficiently and more scalable, and started to buy multiple properties at a time and brought on some teams. And this didn't happen overnight, by the way, so I don't want to make you think I was, I did that second deal, lost my money, got a mentor, and then everything was smooth after that, and I hired teams. No, that was definitely an evolution. But these days, I mostly live off of passive income. I have a fairly substantial portfolio of properties I've been collecting over the years. I mostly invest in the US now, even though I'm still Canadian.
On that US part, so kind of give us kind of your, and it's great to hear kind of your journey in real estate. You have your kind of job, your employment, and then you invest in real estate as a novice, but you end up making more money in real estate than you do in your job, and you quit your job, you take that step, and that's a very difficult step for many to take, but you had the guts to do it at a time, and now you're full on into real estate. Talk to us about when your focus changes to the US and why is that? And talk to us about that journey, if you may.
Nice question.
Yeah, so for the first 15 years of my career, so about half of it, I only invested in Calgary. I always invested close to home, and that's what people told me to do, invest close to home. And I would agree with that for certain strategies, and I would disagree with that greatly for other strategies. But anyway, a buddy of mine who lived in Calgary, he got a really good job offer. He was a physical therapist, and he got a really good job offer in Las Vegas. And so he moved from Calgary to Vegas. And I thought, wow, I got a free place to stay in Vegas. This is awesome. And so every month or so, I would go fly down and hang out with them. And but I have a little bit of a different addiction than most people that love Vegas. A lot of people go there because they love gambling and partying and drinking. And I'm not really into it. That's not really my scene. But my addiction, especially back in those days, was I could not drive past an open house and not go in and talk to the realtor and look at the property and find out the motivation of the seller. It's just, that was in my blood. And so that's what I do. I go down to Vegas and I drive around the neighborhoods and look at the properties. And what I noticed at that time is the values kept going up and up and up. And at that point, Calgary is very, very flat. The market was not really doing anything.
What year is this?
This would have been a few years before the big recession. So I would say 2000 and 2005, 2004, somewhere in there.
Okay.
And yeah, boy, time flies. I can't believe it was that long ago. Anyway, so around that time frame. And what I was noticing is the prices kept going up like crazy. And what was happening back then, and it's happening again now, by the way, is a lot of people from California were looking for places to move to lower their taxes and their cost of living. And Vegas was one of them. And to me, it just seemed like a no-brainer. I had a friend on the ground there. I had this amazing opportunity. I had no clue, though, as a Canadian, how to invest in the US.
Right.
And so I really had two choices. One was I could do the strategic thing, and that's try to figure out everything you need to know and learn about the taxes and moving money and all these things, or jump in, which is what I chose to do. And I'm glad that I did, because I basically figured out the other stuff as I went, but I would have missed that opportunity. And that opportunity for me is life-changing. So I started to buy properties and I was flipping them mostly, as I mentioned, to Californians. It was very, very easy relative to what I was doing in Calgary at that time because the prices were just going crazy. And that worked really, really well. But then, a few years later, that was pre-recession, the big recession hit the US. And Vegas was actually the hardest hit city in the US. If you look from the peak to its lowest point, it dropped 80%. So imagine like a $200,000 property now being worth 40 or 50,000 bucks. That's how hard it got hit. And that created a whole new opportunity. Now the flipping was done. There were no people, nobody wanted to hear about real estate. Everybody was losing their homes. And I switched my focus. I went from being a flipper to now going back to how full circle to where I originally started. And that was buying properties for the long term, because the US was becoming a nation of renters and all these people were losing their homes. And where were they going? They were going into rentals. And so I started to buy a lot of properties for pennies on the dollars. People were losing them. I was picking them up. And back in those days, I had very little competition. Americans weren't buying. Canadians weren't yet investing in the US. That became a trend as as that unfolding of the recession continued to happen. And it became kind of the cool thing to do. But back then, I remember there were auctions I would go to and they'd be in a parking lot and there'd be 5 people there. And I just go negotiate and say, hey, if you let me have this property, I won't bid against you on that property. And we actually made deals to not compete against each other. Well, that auction eventually turned from 5 people to 20 people to 100 people to too big for the parking lot. And those things changed. But that's where I kind of cut my teeth on US investing. And since then, to be honest, I don't do very much in Canada anymore because it makes so much more sense on so many levels. The price points,
yes.
Canada is insane, especially where you guys are in Vancouver, extra insane.
Yeah.
But the ROI is so low. And also in Canada, we have something called the Privacy of Information Act. And that basically, as you know, says, hey, well, if you can't just publish information about people, you can't say, hey, this person is going into foreclosure. And so the banks can't publish lists of the information we need as investors to go do our job. In the US, they have, instead of the Privacy of Information, they have the Freedom of Information Act. And it's the exact opposite. So there's ways to go and find smoking deals and go and I don't like the term real estate investor. I like the term problem solver. We can go find people that have problems and go create solutions for them and get paid for it. So it's a great win-win. But you can't help people with problems if you don't know how to find the people with problems. So in Canada, there's ways to do it, but it's so much tougher. In the US, it's all there for you. And there's different types of auctions like tax deed auctions, which I'm happy to elaborate on. There's so many different strategies.
For sure.
Yeah.
We'll get into that, but I just want to kind of quickly take a step back as far as your flipping. Talk to us about what was the flipping strategy, because now a great part of being a flipper in real estate investing is you're not actually holding any properties. If a recession or a change in demographics comes upon you, you know, since the time that you're holding a property is very short, it allows you to kind of balance yourself accordingly. So talk to us about what did a flip entail at that time when you were flipping properties in Las Vegas?
Yeah, flip was really relatively easy. I mean, the markets were going up so fast that you just bought something, and by the time you finished the renos, which usually I would look for stuff that was really minor, like just lipstick, like paint it, maybe change the floor coverings. We weren't doing, for the most part, very extensive renovations, whatever possible. And by the time you'd finish that, not only would the property be worth more because of the forced appreciation that you created by adding value by fixing it, but also just the market was naturally going up on top of it. So back then it was super easy. Now during the recession, that was a whole different ball game where you couldn't resell a property. Everybody, it was such a strong buyer's market, but so many people were scared. And I've been in this business long enough, even at that point, I'd been in the business long enough to see several cycles. And we know, if you know that real estate is cyclical, you know it's going to come back. And once you know that, you don't really have that same fear. Like I find that markets way overreact. So right now, in a lot of the markets, like Vancouver, for example, it's going up like crazy. I have a friend who just sold his home in Vancouver, and he got $125,000 over list, over his asking price in like a matter of hours. And people are overreacting. There's this mindset that, oh, if I don't buy something now, I'm never going to get into the market. It's going to keep going up forever. Well, conversely, on the other side of things, when it's dropping, people are terrified. Nobody's buying except for me and a few other people, but people get really afraid that it's going to drop forever and it's never going to come back. Well, it's always, the markets are always going to come back unless there was something, if there's some sort of terrorist, and even terrorist attacks, we've seen New York comes, you can come back from that. But unless there's something major where, for whatever reason, nobody ever wants to live in that place again, it's always going to come back. I've done a lot. I did a give back project in New Orleans where we fixed up a bunch of homes that were damaged by Hurricane Katrina, and that was a give back project. And even a place that's below sea level where they know there's going to be other hurricanes, we're probably going to see that same thing happen again. At some point, people are still buying real estate there and the market came back. And so if you know that real estate's cyclical, you lose that fear. And when everybody, and I think Warren Buffett says it best, when everybody's being fearful, that's when you should be greedy. And when everybody's being greedy, you should be fearful. And I think that's the best advice. But so sometimes you have to switch your strategy as we get to different parts of the cycle, which is what I did. But back in the day when I was flipping, anything you get your hands on, even if you did nothing to it, literally a few weeks later, it'd be worth more. And for me also, every time I look at a property to flip, I also look at it, I want to have a plan B. What if, because if I'm relying on the market to keep going up, that's a little bit of gambling. You don't know for sure that it's going to keep doing that. At some point, it's going to turn. If you hold that property long enough, you may wait too long and be in trouble. So I also looked at it as, okay, well, if I have to hold this property, what kind of rent would I get? And so I knew that either way I would win. And so it's good to have a plan B.
And that's the best part about being a real estate investor or problem solver, is you really adapt to things. So when something's not working out over here, you can adapt and be successful somewhere else. So that's kind of the beauty of it for people that are watching and want to get into real estate investing. You just got to do your due diligence.
Absolutely.
Mike laid it out like that. When thing turns down, you kind of move on or you create a new strategy.
Perfect. That's why it's so important also to have a lot of tools in your tool belt. When I bought that first property, I had 0 tools in my tool belt. I just got really lucky and it worked out for me, luckily. And then, like I said, I tried to switch my strategy and apply what I knew or actually didn't know to now. I went from being a long-term holder. That first property was meant to be like a 25-year hold, let the mortgage get paid down, then I got a clear title property. That was the original strategy. And then my ego got the best of me and suddenly, I know everything there is to know. And I went from holding to flipping, which is a totally different ballgame. And didn't really know how to do either really well, holding or flipping. But luckily I had that very humbling lesson. And then since then I've added a lot of tools to my tool belt. So when I see a potential deal, if all you've got is a screwdriver, you're only going to see certain kind of deals as being deals. So when you have your hammer and you have your chainsaw and all these other tools in your real estate tool belt, then you can examine things and look at it from a bunch of different perspectives and also have a plan B. Because so many people got in trouble because their only strategy back then was, the market's going to keep going up forever. So so I'm going to buy as many as I can. If that's your only strategy and you're relying on something not in your control, eventually you're going to lose. Eventually you're going to take a big hit and lose a lot of your gains.
And you going through all this, you've literally paved the way now for people to come to you and get advice so they don't have to go through all the, try to find all their own tool belts. So why don't we take a turn and talk about how you now help other people and you've paved the way for them to find success in real estate investing?
Yeah, absolutely. So for most of my career, I was just doing this for myself. And when I first started, as I mentioned, I was in my early 20s. All my friends thought it was nuts, especially back then. Now, there's all these shows on TV, so people at least see that real estate investing is potentially lucrative, but everybody thought I was crazy back in those days. And they all said, Mike, you're not going to make it. And back then I was extremely shy. Like in high school, I was the shyest kid in the class. Anyway, so none of my friends saw me as being somebody who's going to be able to negotiate and do sales and stuff like that. Neither did I, for that matter. But once I had that first property under my belt and I had that success, it kind of changed how I saw myself. Even though it was not really, it was all based on luck, but I saw myself as being somebody who's an expert at real estate way too prematurely, but it at least got me where, hey, this is what I want to do. And I developed a passion for it at that point. Before that, I never had that even on my radar to do real estate. And all of a sudden that became my passion. And once it became my passion, it's like I knew even if I failed, I was going to figure out how to get back on my feet. But the reason I tell you all this is all my friends who thought I was going to fail, most of them later on went to be some of my investors and clients. And anyway, when I started to invest in the US and that recession kicked in, out of the blue, all my friends who wanted to invest in the US said, hey, I know we used to make fun of you and we thought you were going to fail, but I want to invest in Vegas too now. How do I do that? All my friends started to come to me out of the blue. And then one day I got a call, I won't mention the names, but from a very, very well-known, prestigious real estate training brand. And they couldn't get people to show up at their events in the US anymore during that recession time. And so they wanted to go across Canada and put on events. And I got a call out of the blue saying, hey, we're looking for a Canadian who's invested in the US, and your name keeps coming up. Could you come teach for us? Okay. And I never even spoke at that point. I'd never even spoken on a stage before. And I was terrified. I was like, that was the last thing I wanted. I never wanted to be in the spotlight. I was never looking to be famous. I never wanted to be on a stage. Yeah. But because of the notoriety of this brand, it was pretty hard, if not impossible, to say no to it. So I did it and toured across Canada for a while. But what that led to, eventually I quit speaking for them because I didn't necessarily like what they were teaching. But decided, man, there's so many people that really want to learn real estate, and there's so many places out there with really bad information. They're dangling that carrot over people's heads, promising they're going to get rich and whatever. And I decided, that what we need is something that's honest. And so I actually I did my very first trainings. I would take Canadians down to Las Vegas. I took them to that auction that I was talking about earlier. That auction did get busier and busier, but you could still get deals there. And so I started to take almost all, it was all Canadians. I don't think I had any Americans at that point to the actual auction. And I took them there and showed them how to pick up properties for, deep discounts. And that was the start of my training program. And then eventually, like I said, that auction got too big and the opportunity wasn't there anymore. And so I stopped teaching. Unlike these big companies, they teach the same thing over and over and over again, whether it works or not, because they're too big to just go and change their materials. And anyway, I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. But then I started teaching people how to do similar strategies in Phoenix, and I took people to Atlanta, different cities. Anyway, this all kind of morphed into and grew organically into what I do these days. And I'm most known, I mentioned tax deeds earlier. What a tax deed is when somebody hasn't paid their property taxes in a number of years, usually 2, 3, 4 years, the county will eventually put that home up on the auction block. And I've had some of my students pick up single family homes for $7,000, $8,000, $10,000. And that's not the down payment, that's the actual purchase price of homes that are worth 80, 90, 100, sometimes more $1,000. And so that's one of the trainings that I was doing up until COVID hit. Now, of course, that auction's been closed. My favorite auction takes place in Houston, Texas. And I was doing 4-day trainings up till shortly before COVID hit. And now that auction's been shut down for a little bit over a year. And so if you imagine that on an average month, let's say 500 homes change hands, and you multiply that by a year, there's 6,000 properties backlog that once that auction opens up, it's going to be incredible, the amount of opportunity. And then there's also been a foreclosure moratorium. So think of how many homes would have got foreclosed on over this year that didn't. And I'm glad. I mean, I'd hate to see banks and counties kicking people out of their home in the middle of a pandemic. That'd be horrible. So I'm glad that there's that moratorium, but that's not going to last forever. And once that ends, there's going to be, once again, we're problem solvers, a bunch of people that head into pre-foreclosure, which is, there's something that I like to call the trifecta of real estate. And every month there's a list published by the county of all these homes that are going to go up for auction. Once again, big advantage to the US. There's no list that I know of published like this in Canada. There's a list of these people who are literally going to lose their home in 3 to 4 weeks. And so we can go to those people before it ever goes to auction and be a problem solver for them and try to help them. And I used to have a company called Foreclosure Fixers back in the last recession. I try to help people stay in their home. And so I either help them stay in their home if it wasn't too far gone, or sometimes I'd have to give them what I call a soft landing, meaning that instead of them losing their home to the county or a bank, instead I would make sure that they had a damage deposit, several months rent, money for food, because literally some of these people would end up literally on the streets unless they found a friend or relative that was willing to take them in. So I give them a soft landing, and then I'd help them rebuild and get back into something that, back into home ownership over time. So anyway, the reason I tell you all this is most people who train on how to do tax liens and deeds, they teach you, oh yeah, here's how you do it. Here's how you go to the auction. Here's some of the steps you need to take. But I think there's a whole opportunity before the auction with the pre-foreclosures, at the auction. And then after the auction, there's a very little known strategy that once again is more US based, that Canadians can take part in all this, by the way. You don't have to be American to do this, but it's called overages. And what that means, so let's say the opening bid on a property at the auction is $5,000. If the home sells, if you see a home that sells for $50,000, the $5,000 belongs to the county fair and square. That's the back taxes. that $45,000 in the middle, that actually belongs to the previous homeowner. Most homeowners have no clue this is owed to them. And a great strategy that requires almost no money. So if you're listening to this and you're thinking, how do I get into real estate with little or no money? This is one of the strategies for sure. You go track these people down and say, listen, I know somebody who owes you $45,000. If you're willing to split that with me, and you get to negotiate whatever it means. Some people take 20%, some take 50%. One of my friends who's been doing this for a long time, she takes 40%, and her smallest paycheck has been $21,000. But more importantly, we're a problem solver. We're connecting people that had no idea this money was owed to them. And it's a great win-win. They would have, imagine you just lost your home over $5,000. Like, you're obviously in a really bad spot financially. So if somebody comes to you and says, hey, I can get you $45,000, even if you took half of it, which is pretty high, but if you did, you're still getting them $22,500 that probably will change your life at that point. So anyway, so that's some of the stuff that I was teaching and still do, or will be teaching again once the auctions open up back again. But when COVID hit, I had, once again, sometimes being in this industry, you learn to pivot pretty quick and do different things. But anyway, when COVID hit, I went back to Calgary and I spent 7 months there, which is a long time for me. I usually am a nomad. So that's the longest I spent there in a long time. And when I first went back for the first 2 weeks, I was just sleeping in because my calendar was empty. I had no flights to catch. Normally I have flights to catch and interviews or whatever. There's nothing. It's like, this is kind of nice. I spent 2 weeks just sleeping in. It was very weird. And then my phone started to ring and I started to get calls from a lot of my friends. Hey, my business is shut down. I don't know what I'm going to do. Can you teach me some of the stuff that you know? Or, hey, I just lost my job. And people were obviously going through a lot of transitions. A lot of people that are usually pretty solid. They're kind of rocks, and they were really in a really good spot pre-COVID. All of a sudden they were coming to me, not just with money issues, but talking about depression, and people are going through a lot of stuff. And for whatever reason, I seem to be the person that people like to call, because I guess of my problem solving skills. And so anyway, since COVID started, I ended up doing some 3-day online events over Zoom, which I've never done before. And I didn't know that I could sit in front of my computer for 3 days, but it turns out I can, and it's actually a lot of fun. And it's not quite as much, the energy is not quite the same as being on a stage, but it is, I really have enjoyed the teaching. So I've been doing that.
And what's the focus for that 3-day event? Is it fix and flip? Is it the deeds that you talked about? Is it kind of the what is it called? The infinite returns with finding somebody that money is owed to them? Which one of those kind of, or all of the above?
It's kind of all the above. And basically what I do is for me, I always like to teach stuff that's relevant to the times. And so right now, for example, there's not a lot of pre-foreclosures out there because there's a foreclosure moratorium. So I'm not going into that much detail on that. But things like wholesaling are working extremely well right now in the States, subject to investing, in Canada, agreement for sale.
Could you briefly, on a high level, explain what is wholesaling?
So wholesaling is a great strategy. Most of the strategies I'm teaching, because like I say, I like it to be relevant to the times. And of course, as people are losing their jobs and they don't have a whole lot of money to potentially invest in, and certainly they have to take not very big risks. Wholesaling is one of the best strategies for somebody in that position. And what that is basically is, let's say, we'll just use really round numbers. Let's say you were driving your kids to soccer and you found a home. I'll use American numbers because I don't want to scare people with Vancouver prices, but you found a home worth $200,000. And as you're driving your kids to soccer, you see a home with tarps on the roof and it's falling apart, obviously neglected, vacant. And then you go and you say, hey, I wonder what the scoop is, what the story. You've probably driven past it 100 times. You never really thought anything of it until you learned what wholesaling was. And now you go and you pull title and you find out who owns that property. And then you call them and say, listen, I drove past your property and I don't know if you've seen it recently, but it is falling apart and it's an eyesore. And you might even send them some pictures of it. And then you say, what's the scoop? Why are you just leaving it sitting there? And a lot of times you get a story like this. Oh, I inherited my parents, my mother died, she left it to me, and I'm getting these tax bills for it. It needs all these repairs. I don't have the money to fix it up. So I'm just like, so these people bury their head in the sand and just hope it goes away. And now you're calling them up as a problem solver and saying, well, listen, if you're just going to let it go, I'd be happy to make you a cash offer. I'll take it off your hands right now. You don't have to fix it. You don't have to clean it. I'll just take it right now. Now, so you know it's worth 200,000, so you offer them 100,000. Once again, I'm just using really round numbers here, and they say, "Oh, I'll take that in a heartbeat." And so now you don't have that $100,000, so you go and you put it under contract anyway, knowing that you can't close on it. And instead of putting Mike Wolf as purchaser, you're going to put Mike Wolf or nominee, meaning that you can now transfer or assign that contract to somebody else. And you're going to give yourself an escape clause. And what I mean by escape clause, you're going to give yourself a way out of that contract, because you know you don't have that 100K. Your goal now is to go find somebody who wants to buy that deal from you. So you now know you have this great deal, and you know that myself, I love to buy. Obviously, I'm in the real estate game. So you now call me up and you say, "Hey, Mike, I found this great property. It's worth 200,000. I've got it under contract right now for 100,000. If you're willing to give me $20,000, I will sign that contract over to you." And so what that means is I'm going to pay you that 20,000. You get paid now, and even if I fail miserably on that deal, you still get to keep that 20,000. You're not tied to the deal anymore. Now I get to run with the deal. You've got the 20,000. You go find more deals like that. You've put zero into the deal. You might have to put $1 deposit to make the contract legal. Other than that, that money is refundable, by the way. So if you did put a large, some sellers will ask you for more. They might say, "Oh, I want 1,000 down or 500 down." But because you have that escape clause, if I say, "No, I don't want it," and you run it by a whole bunch of other people and they say they don't want it, probably one, you don't have a great deal anyway. But two, your deposit will be fully refundable. So it's never in danger. It's not in jeopardy. You'll get that money back if you can't close on it. But that's basically what wholesaling is. You're basically being the middleman. You're finding a property, putting it under contract, finding a buyer for it. The buyer is usually going to get the bigger paycheck, but they're taking more risk. They're putting up all the capital. And it's a great strategy for people that maybe you lost your job or your business and you're trying to think, well, what am I going to do to reinvent myself? And the clock is ticking. That's something that you can do. And I'm not going to say it's get rich quick. And certainly it's not, nothing in real estate is get rich quick. There is some work involved for sure. But if you learn how to do that properly, it can be very lucrative. One of my students, he's 22 years old, and he's now done 6 of them in around a 2-month period, and he's made $140,000. He's 22 years old. So he, and he's actually, I teach how to do this over the computer. You don't have to go looking at homes. You don't have to fly anywhere. You don't have to do any of that. It's all done online. And he actually lives in San Diego, but he was buying properties in Tennessee, and he'd never even been to Tennessee. And it's kind of funny because I have for my inner circle students, I have a Facebook group, and he posted in there him holding up his first 2 paychecks, which added up to like 50 grand. And he goes, "Here I am in Tennessee. I came to pick up my paychecks." And I go, "I don't know if you know this, but you don't actually have to fly to pick up your paychecks. They'll wire the money to you." He goes, "Mike, you only do your first real estate deal once." So he was so excited. Yeah. He went over to Tennessee, which is his market. Now he decided he's going to move from San Diego to Tennessee because he loved it. Okay. And like I said, he had 6 properties he was going to wholesale. He's wholesaled 5 now, and he decided he's going to buy the 6th one to live in. So he's actually moving to Tennessee. So it's not necessarily get rich quick. And I'll tell you that he did a ton of work. He spent a lot of time making phone calls and doing the things that we taught. So you may not get the same results as him, but if you put in some effort, your first deal can definitely change your financial future. And some deals are very small. You might find just a minor deal, get $3 grand or $5 grand. But I also know students that have made over 100 grand on one wholesale deal.
Wow.
Awesome.
Okay, that's fantastic.
I want to put a quick perspective here. So obviously we're here in Canada. Our background is in construction, development, real estate here in Canada, but our focus is in the US, partnering with Canadians to invest in the US. So I'm very familiar with kind of both markets, but it was very interesting hearing you speak about wholesaling and where the seller at times is looking for a $500 or $1,000 refundable deposit. Well, I know a group or a person who is very active wholesaler here in Vancouver. And again, to put this into perspective, how the extreme real estate prices here. So his offer or his proposal to the sellers was he would find not the dilapidated properties, but he would find properties that were either undervalued, or he would see listings that, and this is an upmarket, he would see listings that have expired. So he would contact the sellers and say, "Hey, I'm looking to buy your property. My issue is I can't close for a year, but I'm willing to give you a $50,000 non-refundable deposit. If I close in a year, then I will, great. Well, we complete a deal. If I don't, you keep my 50,000. So I would say he would kind of use, maybe kind of that greed in sometimes that people and kind of nothing to lose anyways. That's my property. What's my property's worth today? That's what I'm selling it for. And what he would do, he would put the assignable clause within the contract, so then he can assign it. Here is we call it the assignee that's added to the name of the purchaser. So he would flip the contract, but this only works in an upmarket. But just to give you an idea what it takes to be a wholesaler here in Vancouver, one of the highest real estate prices in the world. Crazy. So it's not a $500 refundable deposit; it's a $50,000 non-refundable deposit.
Wow, that's insane. That is insane. And people are doing crazy things right now because the market's totally like ridiculous. And that's one of the things you don't want to do is get caught up in the emotion and get caught up in all the hype. And And I see people doing that. They're putting offers in, no conditions, no inspection. And that's kind of a good way to get yourself in a lot of trouble. And also buyer's remorse. If you're not inspecting that property, you don't know what you're getting yourself into. And a lot of times, the only way you're going to make money is if the market continues to go up. And it's not going to happen forever. And as things start to open up again and more properties come on the market, and there's more foreclosures hitting the market and the supply increases, I think there's gonna be a lot of buyer's remorse and a lot of people in trouble, unfortunately, because they didn't buy very smart.
Right.
Got it.
Right.
And so there's another metric that we focus on very much. And again, this is kind of the Canadian real estate market and US real estate market, is the rent to value ratios. So in the US, they have this kind of metric, this is kind of a concept of 1% rule, where your month's rent should equal close to or at 1% of your asset value. So currently on the deals that you're looking at and advising and educating your students on, what is that rent to value ratio? And again, just to give you a Vancouver perspective, our rent to value ratios here are 0.2% to 0.3%, kind of approximate kind of number. So you're in extreme negative cash flow. So talk to us about the rent to value ratios that exist on deals you're looking at.
In the US.
Yeah. In the US, there's markets where you can actually not only satisfy the 1% rule, there's actually some markets where you can satisfy the 2% rule if you want it. However,
really? Wow.
So if you want it, now I'm gonna put a big asterisk next to that and say just because you can doesn't mean you should. Right. And so what that means, when you have a very high amount of rent relative to purchase price, that usually signifies you have a really bad economy. Because if somebody knows that, hey, I could own this house for less than renting it, why wouldn't they own it? And that usually means that the economy is not good and people aren't able to keep jobs. And usually we'll find the places that satisfy that are typically places with shrinking populations where people are moving away. And so I'll use Detroit as an example, where I made a big mistake early on in my US career, and I bought 3 properties there and never again. So I used to look at it as the homes are so cheap, how can you possibly screw up? Well, how you screw up is that once you buy the property, well, it's not just the purchase price, but now you are responsible. Of course, with ownership comes liability. And so when you're in a place with a really bad economy, what I found out, I had 3 different properties in 3 different parts of town. They weren't close to each other. All 3 of them were constantly getting vandalized. People were stealing copper, and they were stealing, I was gonna say everything that wasn't nailed down. They were stealing things that were nailed down.
Wow.
So when you have a lot of people that don't have work, they have to turn to some sort of way to get money. And it turns out they like to steal things. And so quite often when you stick to that 1% rule, it's going to lead you down a rabbit hole. It takes you to the wrong market. So I'm going to teach you how I pick a market just really briefly, because I have a really long presentation on this, but I won't. Please. I know in interest of time. But the first thing you want to look at when you pick a market, most people don't even think about this. You want to go to a place where it's where it's landlord friendly and not tenant friendly. So in the States, if you look at a place like California, if you had a tenant that wasn't paying rent and was trashing your place, it can take you over a year to get rid of them. So you want to be really careful with that. That's the number one thing, because if you buy in a market where your tenant can stay a long time, I can guarantee you your mortgage company is not going to say, oh, well, I see you got a bad tenant, we feel bad for you. Don't pay us. You don't have to pay us till you start getting rent. That will never happen in a million years. So you're still responsible for your mortgage payment, property taxes, insurance. That doesn't stop. Those bills keep coming in when you're not having any cash flow. So pick a market that's landlord friendly. I love Atlanta, which is where I sell my turnkey properties. we can usually get rid of a bad tenant within 3 weeks, sometimes quicker, and it's very, very business friendly there. Number two thing you should look at, and this is how I created my wealth, is to look at what are the chances of appreciation. And appreciation is one of the biggest things that causes appreciation is simple supply and demand. So if you want to make a lot of money, figure out where people are moving to and start buying there before they figure out in their mind that that's where they're moving to. And so with COVID, what we're seeing some new trends emerging that have never really been there before. Like a lot of people doing business over Zoom now and realizing I don't have that commute to the office anymore. So if you can get further from the city center, usually you're going to get a lot more house, a lot more land for a lot less money. And people are willing now to be further from the city center because that job isn't bringing them there anymore. So people aren't necessarily going to the city center, and they're also leaving places. Where are they leaving? They're leaving places that are unaffordable. If you lose your job and you're living, I'll use Vancouver, you're living in Vancouver and you don't have a job, your lifestyle is not very sustainable for very long there. So where are you going to move? You're going to go somewhere cheaper with a lower cost of living and where there's jobs. And so Atlanta is a place where the government isn't just landlord friendly, but they're very business friendly. And they give a whole bunch of tax incentives for businesses to open up shop there. So if we look at Atlanta's head office, Coca-Cola, Home Depot, Turner Broadcasting, Delta Airlines, the list goes on and on and on. And actually, Microsoft just announced that they're making that one of their hubs, and they're bringing in the short term 9,000 jobs. Mm-hmm. So a lot of businesses like to go there because they don't pay very much tax, and the government's smart because they know, hey, if we give these businesses some tax breaks, they're going to bring in a bunch of employees and we can tax them. And so, but that's good news for us as landlords because we know that if our tenants lose their, let's say we know that Delta Airlines, which has their head office in Atlanta, we know that the airlines are going to be struggling for the next little bit. Well, if you got laid off at Delta, you can go work for Coca-Cola or Microsoft or a host of all those other companies that have their offices there. So if we contrast that with, we'll use Detroit again because I still have very bitter memories. If we contrast that with Detroit. Well, Detroit's known for the auto industry. And the auto industry is probably, there's not a lot of people losing jobs thinking, I should really buy a new car right now. There's not a lot of that. And in addition to that, cars are not going to look the same as they have in the past. The big leaders in the car industry are going to be like Apple and tech companies, Uber. It's going to be way different. It's not going to be Ford, Chrysler, GM. They're old school cars. New school cars are self-driving, self-flying. Who knows what they're going to do, but they don't look like the stuff that's coming out of Detroit right now. And so that city hasn't really reinvented itself. And you can certainly fit the 1%, 2% rule there. Same with Buffalo. There's a bunch of cities I could list off, mostly in the northern US. And people are leaving there in droves. So yeah, in theory, you can get great returns on your rent. That's the third thing we look at. Number two is appreciation. Number three is the returns. How hard is your money going to work for you where you're holding that property? But if you focus on that, that's where most people go first. And you pick the wrong market, you're going to get what I call paper returns. On paper, it's going to look awesome. In reality, you're going to have very high vacancy because people will pay the first month's rent, maybe the second month, and then they don't have a job. Where's that money coming from to pay you? They can't. So you're going to have a hard time evicting them because they've got no place to go. And once that home is vacant, it's going to get vandalized. Like every second day, you're going to get the police are going to be there. They don't even go there anymore, but you're going to have nonstop headaches. So I would say don't focus strictly on the 1% rule. So you look at those other two things first, and then look at the returns you're going to get. And so a lot of the markets right now that are really good and really solid they've become appreciation plays because we know that people are going to head there looking for jobs, looking for a lower cost of living. So if we look at, I'll use California, everybody's leaving California right now, and they're going, in the West, they're heading to places like Phoenix, smaller extent Vegas, a lot of the Texas markets, and Idaho of all places. I don't think I could leave the beaches of California for Idaho, but that's just me as a Canadian who heads very far south to be near the water. But you have to look at where the trends are and be ahead of the game. And in the East, a lot of people are moving to places like Atlanta where there's jobs and low cost of living. And so I would never want to give up that appreciation to make an extra few $100 a month in rent. If I can, it's kind of funny. I had a Facebook memory pop up a few weeks ago, and it was a property that I promoted on my Facebook page that was $105,000 in Atlanta. One of my turnkey properties 8 years ago. That property is now probably worth around $350,000. Now, if I would have picked a property in Detroit instead, try to fit that 1% rule, I don't think there'd be any appreciation. And I'd be very lucky if my cash flow didn't get all eaten up by renovations and from the vandalism and from the vacancy. So you have to, so I just want to really clarify that, because so many people get caught up in these 1% rules and all these things. Yeah, in a perfect world, that would be awesome. In a perfect world, that existed. And there was a point where Atlanta did satisfy that. But right now, you're probably honestly going to get, if you're holding a property in Atlanta, you're probably, because the market's gone up a lot and the rents haven't quite caught up yet, but they will, you're going to get probably half that. You're going to get maybe 5% to 6% per year. But the bigger part of that picture is that market is going up very, very quickly. And there's homes, my cheapest home right now for sale, I think is $90,000. So that's not even a shed in Vancouver or Calgary or any Canadian city for that matter.
Just to focus on Atlanta. So if you have an interested investor currently to buy a property in Atlanta through what the services you offer, and from the rents they would collect, first of all, what is kind of the conventional mortgage that they could get? What would a down payment be? What is the LTV? What is a down payment they need to put as a Canadian citizen buying a place in Atlanta today?
Yeah, so if you're a Canadian citizen, most of the banks in the US are a moving target. And right now, since COVID, not really very many of them are lending to foreign nationals, unfortunately. Once again, that's the moving target. So by the time you watch this, everything could shift, we never know. But for Canadians, your best options are, one, look at RBC. They have both Canadian and US branches. We've had pretty good success with them. And they're a bit of a moving target. I think I've had some students and clients purchase with 25% down in the past. Last I heard it was 40, but once again, that number changes.
Sure. Let's say 35% down through RBC, let's say on a hypothetical. Now, from the rents they collect on that property, would they be positive cash flow, negative cash flow? Would they break even? And what is the target? What is kind of the thesis?
Yeah, well, you should be able to get with the current rates easily some positive cash flow. And the target right now, and this is what I recommend for most investors that are just starting out, is to really focus on getting big appreciation. Even if I could break even on a property cash flow wise in the short term, if I know that I can be in a market that there's no reason why people are not going to move to a place that's creating lots of employment. That's first and foremost on a lot of people's mind right now. It's like, okay, I lost my job or I lost my business. I've got to start over. Where can I afford to do that? I can't stay, if you're living in Midtown Manhattan paying $5,000 a month for a 1-bedroom apartment, when you had your job, that might have been sustainable. Right now, for a lot of people, you're going to burn through your savings if you have any very, very quickly. And people aren't panicking yet because there's that foreclosure moratorium, there's an eviction moratorium, so people aren't panicking. But like I said, this is all going to shift, and people are going to have to make some pretty big choices. And in the US, I find much more so than Canadians, people are willing to relocate in search of jobs. Like, people will move very quickly, and people also get on this tangent. Like in California right now, that's all everybody talks about. Oh, the taxes here suck so bad. They should try living in Canada. But anyway, that's all everybody's talking about. So that's why they're moving to Texas. Texas, there's no state income tax. So that's why they want to go there. They want the opposite of what they've got. So people will often get on this bandwagon, and I think a lot of those people who move to Texas will eventually move back. Not there's anything, I'm not putting down Texas. There's some nice cities there. But anyway, a lot of people make these rash decisions when there's a little bit of pressure on. So you want to be in the path of progress and they leave. And you also want to consider, well, where are they leaving? Is that market eventually going to come back again? And I think for the US, people that are leaving, especially the northern cold places that look a lot like Canada in the winter, there's a trend in general, even before COVID, of people heading from north to south. And we have all these baby boomers retiring. Where are they going to go to? They're heading to the south, not to the north. And so you just have to be keep in front of all these trends. But going back to the returns, right now, in all honesty, that market is going up very, very quick. Rent will be going up very, very quickly shortly. And so you only have to buy the property once. That rent is going to go and keep pace as the property prices go up. It just hasn't hit yet because a lot of people they're kind of staying put right now while things unfold with COVID. As that shifts, we're going to see a massive increase in rent, and those numbers will go up. But in the meantime, you can capture that appreciation play. And right now, as I look back, when I was younger, if I had made more decisions around, okay, I want more cash flow, doing that right out of the gate, having an extra 100 or 200 bucks won't change your life. Having that extra 100,000, 200,000, 500,000 appreciation will allow you to buy more properties, which will in turn give you more cash flow, which will in turn change your life. But you have to do things in the right order. And to me right now, if you call me up and you say, hey, Mike, I've got $2 million in my bank account, I want more of a lifestyle of freedom. How do I do that? Yes, I can definitely help you deploy your money so it's working hard for you so you don't have to work very hard. But if you're just starting out and you can barely scrape up enough of that down payment to get your first home, don't buy in the wrong market just for that extra 50 or 100 bucks a month. I guarantee you that down the road when you're watching all these other markets taking off, like imagine if instead of Vancouver 10 years ago, you would have bought, I don't know, Yellowknife. And I don't even know what the prices are in Yellowknife. But imagine where you'd be right now. Maybe you would have got a little bit more rent relative to purchase price back then, but you certainly would not have captured that appreciation. And that appreciation is what changes your life.
Yeah, just like Alberta. I used to sell real estate in Alberta, and really you're not playing the appreciation game whatsoever.
Yeah, no, especially now, there's a lot of downward pressure.
It's important to have the balance, though, to have the cash flow at least on that break-even mark. So no, you're not in negative cash flow. So appreciation has always been great here in Vancouver, but you're in extreme negative cash flow. So
you got to find the places like Mike and us find in the US where you get cash flow and appreciation.
And on talking about us and Mike, are you focused at all in multifamily? We've discussed this before. On a personal call, but talk to us about where do you see multifamily, because that's kind of a natural evolution for real estate investors to scale their business and look at multifamily, especially on the rental side.
Absolutely. And, I have also multifamily in the past. I've done that with partners who were multifamily experts. And I recommend that if you've never done a multifamily on your own, definitely team up with somebody else, such as you guys, because you're basically buying a business. And if you're not familiar with that business, just like you can sometimes you see restaurants and they're super successful, they're always super busy. Then you go like literally across the street, and there's another restaurant that's always changing to a different restaurant. And that comes from people's experience, being good at what they do. And so if you're doing multifamily, that is a game that you don't want to play on your own. You definitely want to do it with somebody else. It's a team sport. And I've done a couple of them, and I did it with the help of other experts as well. And I see that as a really big play, especially in the US right now, because what happened in 2008, 2009 during the last recession, the US became a nation of renters. And that notion of everybody having the American dream and the white picket fence, that disappeared. And we're about to see that on a bigger scale in a lot of ways. We're going to see a lot of people right now that have never missed a mortgage payment in their life, and they've never missed a credit card payment. They have perfect credit all their life. But what do you do if your business suddenly shuts down? Imagine that you owned a big office building in the middle of Manhattan 2 years ago. What an enviable position that was 2 years ago. And imagine how horrible a position that is to be right now. So these are people with massive amounts of money. We're going to see this massive transfer of wealth, and things are shifting. And a lot of people, unfortunately, are going to go from ownership to rentals, and having multifamilies and rentals in general, whether single family or multifamily, is a great place to be. There's going to be a lot of appreciation, and now's a great time to get into that.
Right on, Mike. Well, let's end with the one question that we always ask our guests that come on. What would be your number one best advice that you would give to a passive investor looking to passively invest in real estate?
Well, if you want to be a passive investor, find somebody, and it doesn't have to be me, but certainly I'd love to have a conversation with you. But find somebody who's done that, I know a lot of people that try to sell passive assets, but they don't have a passive life. Like I said, I'm living in resorts on beaches, and I'm still working, doing the teaching once in a while because I love it, but I'm only doing things that I love to do. I'm not doing things that I have to do. And so when I meet people that want to create passive income, that should be what you should strive for, is to create a lifestyle of freedom for yourself. And I know a lot of people that make a lot of money, but they don't really have the life. They have a lot of money coming into their bank account, but as soon as they stop working, everything starts to fall apart. And I'm speaking actually from experience, because that used to be me like 15 years ago. I was a workaholic. And then I've learned how to scale things, but leveraging other people's skill sets. And I built up my teams, and I put systems in place. But for most people, all you really need is enough properties that generate enough rent for you and have other people collect that for you, and you're set. But a lot of people don't really know how to do that, and they make big mistakes. They pick the wrong markets, they pick the wrong neighborhoods, they don't have a good team. If you don't have a good team, passive income is only as good as the teams that you've got that are helping you collect that money and the systems they have in place. And so I'd recommend talking to somebody who's created that themselves, because they've, trust me, I have gone through a lot of people to build up my dream team. It didn't start that way, and I'm sure you guys can relate. So find somebody who's been doing this for a while, that's already kind of been through the challenges that you're likely to face, especially trying to do it remotely. When you try to invest remotely, especially in a different country, there's things you need to know. In addition to having the good teams, you also have to have the right, entities in place, so you're not paying too much in tax, and also you don't want to pay too much in currency exchange. There's a lot of things that you don't know. So talk to somebody who's an expert. I'm happy to jump on a call with anybody who wants to talk real estate.
You're awesome, Mike.
And we'll include all your contact information below the video so people can get in touch with you. Hey, we really appreciate it.
Yeah,
always
thank you so
great.
much.
Lots of knowledge, lot of education. I'm truly humbled every time I speak with you. So we really appreciate you took the time and met with us today.
Yeah, and thank you
Mike.
so much for being our guest today, Mike.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure, and so nice to see you again. And can't wait till we can get back together in person, hopefully in the very near future.
In the very near future. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.